अभी स्क्रीन ऑफ है लेकिन सर्च करो यूट्यूब पे दिख रहा है क्या लिंक
करो क्या टीटी पीएचडी डिफेंस क्या what should I search for?
देखो आदित्य
Probably important. आदित्य सिर्फ डॉलर तो नहीं आना चाहिए हाँ नहीं कोई और हाँ चल रहा
Estamos aici? Da.
Julia, she's a big admirer of your skirt.
Yeah.
She would like to ask you where you bought it.
The shop last month. It was very cheap. When you enter the festival from the university side, it's right on the yes.
Oh, I think it's nice.
But I bought it like 2 years ago. It's made in Italy.
Yeah, but it's really nice. I think it's so cool.
See.
La tricou cred că aș fi pus... nu aș fi pus aceea da, ceva care se contrastă ceva un verde oliv, ceva care se merge sau un roz.
Yeah, exactly.
Now something that they are going to grow that. Is that okay? Then I will come and provide that as well.
This is from the group actually. No, we are supposed to sit here. That is for seating. Reserved seat. Yeah, click it on. Click it. Have you paused? Oh, this one. वो रोएगा रे कमेटी के साथ उसने गलत बोला साथ में
think I'll start now. So welcome everyone to this defense ceremony for my thesis titled Solid Oxide Fuel Cell Integrated Power Plants. Yeah, and thanks a lot for coming and really supporting me in this final quest to get my doctoral degree. So before actually the defense starts at 12:30, the formal defense. I will very informally and very shortly try to introduce my work. Yeah, maybe 10-12 minutes, and yeah, then the defense will start at 12:30. So as the title suggests, the work is basically about power plants, which are industrial facilities where you generate electricity. Coal, natural gas. These are fossil fuels which are made underground over millions of years, and burning these fossil fuels and releasing the product gases like CO2 and methane in the atmosphere is harmful and unclean. So we have to reduce emissions drastically in the coming years. Power plants like coal, so power plants where you fire coal or natural gas as fuel are one of the largest sources of CO2 emissions globally. Now, what can be done to reduce the CO2 emissions? First, to reduce the fuel consumption itself. So that can be done by designing efficient power plants and also flexible power plants. The second option is that you increase the use of renewable sources. So like biomass is one of the, let's say, the technologies where you can co-fire coal with sort of biomass and use in power plants. So that promotes a lot of renewable power production. And the third option is that, okay, you produce CO2, but you separate it from the process and you separate it and store it somewhere. So basically we have to design clean, efficient, flexible power plants. But new power plants are important, but also there are existing power plants which are conventional, which have been operating for many years. Those have to be upgraded using these approaches. Now, it is very difficult to do actual experiments on large power plants because it's expensive. Also, people don't have much experience. So, thermodynamic models can be developed on basis of the real design of the power plant, and you can actually use it to see if you change operating conditions, how the power plant will basically behave. So this work, this PhD dissertation is basically presents multiple system design concepts on both coal and natural gas power plants, where I try to basically, so we had a good collaboration with an existing power plant in the Netherlands, and I just tried to come up with a system design using their real design drawings. So but also like which there are, like for coal we have gasification is one of the technologies where you can use coal efficiently to produce power. For gas, we use a power plant called as IRCC, which is integrated reforming combined cycle plants. So the basic concept is that you have the fuel, you reform it or you gasify it, you produce a gas called syngas. You clean it of contaminants, and then basically in a gas turbine or a combined cycle you produce power. Now I talked about efficiency, flexibility, CO2 capture, but what technologies are there which we can use in such power plants? So my thesis basically focuses on biomass gasification as using renewable power production in existing power plants. Fuel cells are one of the technologies which are highly efficient to convert fuel directly to electricity. Then in terms of flexibility, I look into something called as fuel or hydrogen storage. So we produce hydrogen, we store it, and we use it as and when required. And the last option is that, okay, we produce CO2, we can also just separate it and capture it and just store it somewhere. So the first part of my thesis basically was, so you look at this beautiful power plant in the south of the Netherlands, which is no longer there anymore, but we had good collaboration with them and we got all design drawings. So on the right side you see that based on the actual design drawings, I tried to basically come up with a thermodynamic model to actually predict what will happen in real if we basically use biomass as fuel. So in the past, the company which owned the power plant called Nuon, now Vattenfall, they carried out extensive experimentation on using 70% of biomass in the power plant. So we got experimental data from them, and basically I used that to validate my model. And what we found out was that so they did the experiments very successfully, and it was concluded that no major plant modifications are required actually to operate existing power plants, coal-based power plants with 70% of biomass. Also, the model which I developed, which is also shows that it predicts the power output and other parameters very accurately, so within like 3% relative deviation. But what Nuon also saw that with the biomass which they used for testing the plant, didn't give them enough power which they had got from coal. So my model was also used to see whether a different fuel can be used to get the same power output. The thermodynamic analysis also showed that in the combustion process during power generation, the irreversibilities in the system are maximum. So the next step was to integrate basically the solid oxide fuel cell technology in this power plant to see whether we can improve the efficiency of the power plant with a model. So what are solid oxide fuel cells? They are basically electrochemical devices which directly convert the chemical energy of fuel to electricity. They are very efficient and they are also very fuel flexible, so you can use fuels like hydrogen, methane, and basically hydrocarbon fuels. The idea was that because combustion is a very irreversible process, so the idea was that using my developed model, we try to fit in a SOFC in the existing plant design and see how the system behaves. So based on this, we concluded that to partially retrofit the existing power plant with solid oxide fuel cells, you can still operate the power plant with plant efficiencies above 40%. And also that till about 40 megawatts of power from the SOFC stack, let's say, there is no major plant modifications required in the existing power plant. The thermodynamic analysis also showed that by retrofitting solid oxide fuel cells, we could reduce irreversibilities in the system and almost about 30% reduction in the losses. In this work, I also developed another model where we try to integrate a big solid oxide fuel cell so that the entire power comes from a fuel cell. And what I concluded is that major modifications would be then required in existing power plants to convert it into a large-scale fuel cell power plant. Now coming from coal to natural gas. So natural gas is also one of the fossil fuels which is predominantly used globally to generate power. Now the third part of my thesis basically investigates flexibility options in natural gas based power plants called integrated reforming combined cycle power plants. What I use as a flexibility option is something called as hydrogen storage, where because I produce hydrogen in my system, so I store it when there is excess demand of electricity, and I use the stored hydrogen to produce power when there is sort of high demand. And I use a technology called metal hydrides, which are basically very efficient solid chemicals, which basically can react with hydrogen to basically produce the metal hydride, and it can store a significant amount of hydrogen with very high efficiency. The advantage of using this technology is that there is a lot of scope for heat integration, and it can give you many options in terms of flexibility. So from this, so I developed also a system model for this power plant, and based on the thermodynamic analysis, we concluded that flexible IRCC plants with hydrogen storage can be operated basically with efficiencies like above 45%. Also with metal hydrides, if you added it in an existing IRCC plant, there is no significant efficiency penalty. The study also identifies important design parameters which can be used in future, basically to optimize the model and also to do off-design studies. As a small preliminary study, because there is also a lot of combustion processes in such power plants, I developed a model to with integrating solid oxide fuel cells to see whether we can also reduce some losses in the existing power plants. Then the last part of my thesis basically is an experimental investigation into reforming of methane, which is a predominant component of natural gas. So the idea was that to see and study basically the kinetics of how methane reforms on single solid oxide fuel cells. We used different, let's say, data fitting approaches, and we tried to compare two popular kinetic approaches to see whether, so basically to see how well each predicts the reforming kinetics. And based on these studies, we concluded that both approaches are very significantly different in terms of predicting reaction rates and also other kinetic parameters. I also have stressed on the importance of carrying out experiments in a proper way, so the experimental approach itself, and also the need for studying more fundamental elementary reaction kinetics in solid oxide fuel cells. So this is somewhat a summary of what I've been doing in the past six years, yeah. So I hope you will enjoy the defense, which starts in 10 minutes. Yeah.
Swimming.
N-am putut să mă rog. Aveam zbor și mi-a vreau să mă duc imediat să mă ajung în România, vreau să mă duc să mă aranjez un pic contact. Ca să fie gata. Pentru că probabil infinite, mi se pare special acolo dar în state n-am probabil să fie același nu știu cum, dar ele găsesc asta. Dar ți-am zis, pe mine nu mă avantează. Ori poate doar în capul meu e așa. Dar uite, știu că vine la tine dacă vrei, că eu n-am așa îți dau un mesaj când plec de aici.
Has to be a present.
Bine, succes! Ne vedem mai târziu. Ceau, ceau!
ये देख मत ऐसे जाता है एयरलाइन से जाता है इस पर भैया का नहीं करना भैया कौन सी फोटो पे स्माइल क्या अरे एक्सलेंट तूने मेरा भी सुना था ना उससे 10 गुना अच्छा एटलीस्ट ठीक है हाँ
Ik open de zitting van de commissie ter beoordeling van de proefschriftinstellingen van Aditya, Master of Science in Mechanical Engineering, Delft University of Technology. De verdediging zal in het Engels worden gevoerd. I request the promovendus to go to the lectern and take their seats. A warm welcome for all of you at the public defense by the candidate of the dissertation entitled Solid Oxide Fuel Cell Integrated Power Plants System and Kinetic Studies. The Board for Doctorates of Delft University has installed a committee to evaluate the thesis and propositions. And the committee will have a debate with the candidate here in public, and it's an honor to present the members of this committee to you, to whom I extend a hearty welcome. On the far right is Dr. Moreno, President of the Italian Hydrogen Fuel Cell Association. Welcome, Dr. Moreno. Next to him, Professor Brennan of Twente University. Next to him, Professor Borrell, Utrecht University. And next to him, Professor Ramirez, Delft University of Technology, Faculty Policy and Management. On this side of the table, we have Dr. Haravin, Delft University of Technology, co-promoter, Faculty of Mechanical Engineering. And on my left is Professor Geerling, also Delft University of Technology, Faculty of Applied Physics, promoter. And on my right, the other promoter, Professor Boersma, Delft University of Technology, Mechanical Engineering. Thank you all for participating in this ceremony. My name is Alpha Meinet. I'm Emeritus Professor of Water Science and Engineering, Delft University, PhD Delft. It's my pleasure to chair this session on behalf of the Rector Magnetius of Delft University. I would now like to start the opposition, and I give the floor to Dr. Moreno.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank you, Mayor Director, to invite me and to give me the possibility to participate in this ceremony. I have a few questions or a few comments to the Varde promovendus. And first of all, I would like to underline that I read the thesis, and I think I found it very interesting because for introducing the concept of green technology to greener, let's say, the CO2, the carbon cycle, introducing the biomasses first, and then introducing solid oxide fuel cell. But I would like to underline, and that's a kind of comment that I ask to you, that nowadays really important not only to produce less CO2 when you use carbon or other fossil fuel, but also to produce cleaner air. I mean, less pollutants, less NOx, less SOx, and less contaminants. The quality of the life is very important. Perhaps the same importance of CO2 reduction. At this point, I would like to ask you how the proposal, your case, is going also in this direction.
Very clear opponent. Thank you very much for your question and also for your appreciative words. I fully agree with you that it's not only important that CO2 emissions be reduced to address global pollution, but also we have to reduce sulfur and so SOx and NOx emissions. Solid oxide, so fuel cells, and so particularly solid oxide fuel cells are is a technology where which is already relatively highly contaminant tolerant, and we use, so the technology which I have proposed in this thesis using natural gas is I mean the device itself is highly contaminant tolerant, and I think that designing power plants, existing power plants, and also new power plants with these technologies is beneficial, because we will reduce emissions, SOx and NOx emissions.
Yes, practically it's because you are not going to burn natural gas, but using in electrochemical.
It is, yes, it is, the process is electrochemical, I agree there, but also I think with conventional gas turbines and combined cycle systems, it is also very expensive to use saturation and also dilute with nitrogen to reduce flame temperatures, to reduce NOx and SOx emissions. But this is a device which is already electrochemically, it converts fuel, which is very efficient, and in addition it is already inherently also contaminant tolerant.
Yes, I have also, let's say, kind of a technical question. Let's say that you say that the future perhaps will be a solid oxide fuel cell, which will be the main plan. Do you think that it will be only solid oxide fuel cell, or will be always, in any case, a kind of hybrid system where the turbine is still present, but as a bottoming of the solid oxide fuel cell, instead of burning something, the solid oxide fuel cell will become the combustion chamber, at electrochemical combustion chamber of the turbine?
So large scale, let's say large scale integration of solid oxide fuel cells in power plants. So this work also shows that there is a limit with which you can retrofit existing power plants with solid oxide fuel cells. And one important thing which has to be considered while retrofitting is also part load conditions, because there is a gas turbine and there is a combined cycle system which is existing, and to minimize modifications in the power plant, you have to also consider part load effects. And I have shown with the system study in chapter 3 that in the power plant which I considered in Gugunam, up to 40 megawatts. So an SOFC start producing up to 40 megawatts. There is no significant part load effect which could be which leads to basically major plant modifications. So and also that I'm not claiming in the thesis that so solid oxide fuel cells are the only technology which is the future, but there is inherent advantage of using solid oxide fuel cells, because there is you can use methane, which is basically natural gas, and there is also syngas hydrogen in the system. It is high temperature. And SOFC gas turbine systems are well known to be very efficient systems. So I feel that it is it has an intrinsic advantage to use SOFCs in large power plants.
Okay, thank you, Matt.
You may proceed with asking other questions if you want. Yes, you're done. It's okay. Professor Brem, may I ask you to continue the opposition?
Thank you, meneer de rector. Waarde promovent. It was really a pleasure to read your thesis. It was very interesting. And I have, of course, some questions. But first, I would like to ask you about the proposition. Meneer de rector, please could you ask to read proposition number 10?
Waarde promovent, could you read or have read proposition number 10?
improving on an individual sport like swimming is unattainable in the absence of a motivational training.
Professor. Okay, thank you. My advice to this sporter is to stop. If he's not motivated, he better stop. Instead of hiring a motivational trainer. So, what was your purpose of this?
Clear component. Thank you for your question. The main thing which I'm trying to address here is that I think if you consider a human from childbirth, we always, when we try to go for a sport, it is always, I mean, we never learn a sport individually. We always have someone who is coaching us, and that's where it starts. And I think eventually when we are an adult, and basically when we are not into too much of sports, and we need to get into a sport like swimming to improve skills and to be more competitive, I think it is very important to have a motivational trainer.
And does it also holds for another individual sport like doing a PhD? Besides your promoter, you also need a motivational trainer.
Yes, intrinsic motivation is important, but what I mean here is that if you have to improve your skill and when you have to get into competitiveness, then it is very important to have a motivational trainer. So yeah, comparing yes, I mean also in the PhD, I think there is some there is a role of the supervisors and things like that. But intrinsic, yes, I agree that there is some intrinsic motivation which is required.
Okay, now you are so motivated. Let's go to biomass. Let's go to biomass. I appreciate that you work on the biomass, and I saw that you stick to 70% biomass co-firing, and but you know that there is some drive in the Netherlands to close down all the coal-fired power plants. So why not 100% biomass? Is that possible? Or, if not, what are the first hurdles according to you in this concept? Can you work this a little bit out?
So the work, already like 70% of co-gasification of biomass in an existing plant is one of the only few examples in the world where they have carried out such a large scale co-gasification.
Still 30% coal.
Yes, 30% coal. And what I've shown with thermodynamic calculations is that there is a limit, because particularly like in the syngas cooler in the Guggenheim power plant, there was a limit of heat transfer which was limiting co-gasification, and also for a particular type of biomass. But if we use clarified biomass, then the model also shows that we could achieve a higher, we could achieve the design case power output. Now, whether it depends on the power plant, I think that whether it's 100%, and also it depends on what kind of biomass you are.
Let's do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
What is then the first hurdle you will see?
The first hurdle, which I think is in the process, which is basically the syngas cooler, where I'm not able to transfer enough heat, and that is causing basically problems downstream the process. So it is a question about how much do you also want to invest in changing the power plant.
Okay, you say for existing plant it's difficult, but
Yeah.
for a new plant,
Yeah.
it's sure possible.
I think if you design, because there are completely biomass fired power plants as well, and I think, but now what I thought we are talking about is co-gasification. So if there is a coal fired power plant, the question was that can we go to 100% biomass? But I think that depends on also the power plant, and also in this specific case, there is a limit in the syngas cooler.
Okay, and yeah, because we are now in a transition, so in the end we want to be completely green, and if we go for 100% biomass, is this the best concept then? Why not just follow the easy concept of combustion and steam cycle? Because you can also get high efficiencies with that system.
But I think the purpose here was also to elucidate other, let's say, parameters like efficiency and also flexibility. That is one aspect which I'm trying to address in the thesis. So biomass is one of the, I think, only renewable sources of energy which can be sort of co-processed in an existing coal designed power plant. So it is, I think, in my opinion, it is one of the logical options to use biomass as the technology to promote renewable power production.
Okay, but if you produce then such a nice syngas, is then an energy application the most wise route to go? Why not go into maybe chemical products?
Polygeneration is always possible also using biomass. You are producing syngas, and you can co-produce hydrogen. You can co-produce even fuel, which is methane. So yes, I mean polygeneration is indeed an option. But the main product which I consider here is electricity, and
okay, you were so enthusiastic about torrefied biomass, and okay, and that's because you throw out a part of the hydrogen, more hydrogen than carbon, but you have to produce it. And so, is there an energy benefit?
There is, yes. The work which I consider here is, I wouldn't consider it to be like a well-to-wheel efficiency really, because so the idea was that okay, with Nuon they already had they wanted calculations basically to see whether with torrefied biomass, which they have already had, to see whether we can actually produce this design case power output. So yes, because torrefaction also is not is energy intensive. So we also, in the end, to consider an overall efficiency, we have to consider the energy utilized to torrefy the wood.
Yeah, the whole chain.
The whole chain. Yes, yes, yes.
It could be 20% loss. Is it really a loss?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on, because efficiency can be defined, I think, in numerous ways. And what I have defined is specific, that okay, I have a torrefied biomass and I'm trying to basically co-gasify it in an existing plant to see how it operates. But yeah, I don't know the real percentage in terms of number, but yes, there will be a loss if we consider also the energy utilized in torrefaction.
Is there time for the last question?
There is time.
Thank you. Then I would like to go to page number 30, table 2.6, where you show the composition of the gases after wash column and after the gas cleaning. And I see a percentage. Assume it's a volume.
Yes,
it's a volume. Yeah. Okay, and on the right-hand side, the composition for tests, so experiments, and the model. And what I then see that the carbon-containing components have for the model a higher percentage, both CO and CO2. Methane was for both 0. And I checked also on page 27 the flows, and also in the model the flow was higher. So then my conclusion is you have 5% more carbon in the output in the model than in your experiment. While as an input you have the same for both. You use the same coal, the same biomass, the same flows. Where does this carbon come from? Or where is the carbon loss in the test? Because the difference is 5%.
Thank you for your question. Actually, the coal composition, the fuel mix which has been used in the model has been obtained from Nuon, and there is to some extent there is some inconsistencies in the calculations which they have provided. And if I see the table 2.6, the differences in the CO and CO2 concentrations as you have pointed out, it's not very significant. But I would actually, there is. I would have sourced it to the inconsistencies in the input fuel mix composition.
Yeah, but it's not only the concentration; it's also the flow in table 2.6. When I look at, for instance, the wash column, I see a flow of 35. I don't know what the unit is, 35 and 40. In fact, 41 for the model. So another 10%. So if you set up a carbon balance, and there's more than 10% more carbon in the output.
Yeah, also I think pertaining to the wash column, the way it was modeled is also using a simplistic approach, because in practice in the plant there are basically two wash columns in series. And what I have used in the model is a simplified wash column, and I combine it using the data which I got from Nuon. So there could be a possibility that there is some also inconsistency in the flow in the wash column.
Okay, but it has an effect on the total carbon that comes out.
Yeah.
That also has an effect then on the power, because you have less, let's say, burnable components in your material, obviously.
Yeah, but the power output you see in table 2.5, that there is a difference in the power output.
Yeah, but for the model it should be then lower, because you assumed more carbon input, in fact, than in the test was.
But I think in terms of so for power generation, it is more about also the heat generated, which is in the combustor, and I think in the model case, I think the steam cycle generates lesser power, but the gas turbine is generating more power.
I'm satisfied with the discussion.
Thank you very much, Professor Bremer. We now continue the opposition with Professor Borg. Future main lecturer.
Waarde promovendus, first of all, before I start with some questions, I would like to really congratulate you on the completion of this thesis. I think you have done really interesting modeling work to try to identify the opportunities, or maybe you should say promises, of solid oxide fuel cells for power generation. I have a couple of questions for you. The first one builds a little bit on that my predecessor here started to ask about torrefaction. I would like to take a little of a moment to explore this a little bit in more detail, because torrefaction takes energy, and when you do an analysis, when you want to compare things, you have to make sure that the system boundaries are comparable. In this case, you don't, because you exclude the torrefaction. So I would like to try to, just before we heard like torrefaction may take 20% of the input. Does that 20% of the energy content of the biomass that is basically lost in torrefaction, does that make up for the increased power production in your mind? Is it worth our while?
For clear opponent, thank you for your question and your appreciative words. I think yes. So as I also agree that basically torrefaction takes energy, but the system boundary, as I probably indicated before, is that it is. So I consider that so the efficiency which I get from the power plant is not an overall electrical efficiency. There is, in principle, the energy required also for torrefaction should be taken into account. But this was also something which was not very readily available to us, and that was also one of the reasons where we took a more simplistic approach. Yeah, can I request you to maybe just re-ask the question?
If you take into account the estimated losses of torrefaction, does the increased power output is it sufficient to really offset the additional energy input for the torrefaction, or should we just go straight for biomass for the gasifier?
No, because I think the additional power which we generate, I mean, how much it is relatable to the input fuel, that is something which also depends on the type of torrefied biomass which you're using. So it is, I think for me it's a bit difficult to actually to come up with whether it's really enough or not. It will depend also on how much additional power is generated and what type of biomass is being torrefied and used in the power plant.
Okay, so I think that would be good then to remark in your conclusions, because it's a big caveat with respect to your conclusions. But I appreciate your answer. I want to go to my next question, and that relates to proposition 2. So, I need to if I could ask.
Madam Promovent, could you read or have read proposition number 2, please?
Partially retrofitting existing coal-fired IGCV power plants with solid oxide fuel cells is thermodynamically viable.
Thank you. You study the solid oxide fuel cells, and they've been on development for a very long time. And you conclude, and also you set the proposition that it is a viable technology, thermodynamically viable for IGCC power plants to operate them. But is it also economically attractive?
Thank you for your question. Economically, there are as of today, solid oxide fuel cells are about, let's say, on an average about 9 times, let's say, more expensive than a coal-based or a natural gas-based, let's say, combined cycle system. But there are major efforts now taken by companies to come up with larger systems, and I agree that there are operating challenges with solid oxide fuel cells. But I think so this study gives already the energy balances, the mass flows and things like that, and this can be directly utilized to carry out an economic study. So this is indeed, next step which should be taken, and to see whether it is really economically feasible. But I think that with the rapid developments which are currently taking place, particularly in the US, it may be economically viable, but it's a bit hard for me to really say yes or no.
But now it's at the moment it's more expensive.
It is yes. At this stage it is expensive, but there are large systems which are available, and these could be actually. But a techno-economic study has to be carried out.
But would you then what time frame are you expecting that it could be economically viable or attractive?
There are currently already systems which are so, like for example with companies like Bloom, they have units which are already like producing 200 kilowatts per box. So it is now a question about how to make it more modular and how to basically make it more compact. So it's maybe in the coming 10 or 15 years it may be possible.
So let's say by 2030.
Right.
10, 15 years. How many IGCC plants are there today, and how many will there be by 2030?
I'm not sure whether this is really true or not, but I've read somewhere that in China there is an IGCC which is built like almost maybe 2 or 3 in a month or something. Not a month.
I thought there was these are October's coal plants.
But there are also a lot of IGCC power plants being built in China. So for power,
not for power generation, for
poly generation. Yeah, for poly generation. But there are a lot of IGCC power plants built globally. So
really,
yeah.
I would be surprised, because as far as I know, gasification plants are in China only built for ammonia today, and I think that's also coming to an end because we've seen an end to the boom in ammonia production. And as far as I know, there's a very limited number of IGCC plants now because we had one in Netherlands, which you studied Bruggen, which is closed.
But it was closed because of, I think, not because of the technology itself, but there were other reasons because of which it was closed. So the technology, yeah.
So let's assume by 2030 this technology may be competitive. There may be a large number of IGCC plants, if I believe you. In December 2015, we also signed the Paris Agreement. And basically, the Paris Agreement means that we need to reduce our carbon emissions, at least here in the Western world, but I also think for China, to almost zero by 2050. If we want to stick to 2 degrees centigrade, so the longer we want to stick to 1.5 degrees centigrade temperature rise, then actually we should stop now. And at the same time, of course, competing technology with the source of fuel cell and IGCC is developing. Wind and solar energy are becoming rapidly more cost competitive. I think on wind, the latest bids for projects in Germany and Texas are below the price of fossil fuel. And for solar energy, I think also they're back in Peninsula now, they bid prices for like 3 cents per kilowatt hour. And also for India, I think the latest bid for a large scale PV installation is very low. So, given this technology, how fast can fuel cells and IGCC plant technology develop? I mean, possibly with carbon capture or not, to be able to compete with these developments. So, what is the market potential by the time by 2030 that this technology is economically viable?
Thank you for your question. I think so. There are pros and cons on each side. If you're comparing with solar, wind, and solid oxide fuel cells, I think the point of my work was basically to see whether in existing plants which are conventional, which are well established, to see how fuel cells can be integrated. But with solar and wind, there is also something which is intermittency, and that has to be taken into account when you are comparing both technologies. And I think in terms of technology development itself, there are major efforts now on both sides. And the only question particularly with fuel cells, I think, is cost, and also to some extent to develop more contaminant tolerant SOFCs and things like that. So the more focus should be on materials. But I think if you compare both the technologies, they are somewhat in a parallel race.
Yeah, parallel race. Yeah. The question is, who will win? So what horse should we bet?
I would say.
Where would you put your money?
I would put it in SOFCs. But because I think in terms of also, because with fuel cells you are also you're getting the efficiency advantage, which is where you can actually use conventional known knowledge on existing fuels directly on a technology which is there. But with wind and solar, there are also other constraints like the intermittency things.
But when you say the solid fuel cell is there, but I just heard earlier that the largest plants in the world is 2.5 megawatts. I don't think it's there yet.
No, I mean, when I say it's there, I meant that when I'm comparing between a solar and a fuel cell, which are, let's say, there with you. I mean, it's not there right now, but if I compare two systems which are actually, let's say, considered, then I would say that, I would, the question which you asked, I mean, I would put my money on solid oxide fuel cells.
Okay, well, that's good to know.
Professor, are you satisfied with the answer?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Ramirez, would you continue
with the director? Guarda promovemos.
Maybe put on your cap.
No. First of all, congratulations in your thesis. The development of cleaner forms of energy production is one of the pillars to actually get a low carbon energy system in the medium to long term, and your work makes a contribution in this area. I do have a couple of questions, and I think it's normal that there's so much knowledge in one book. I'm gonna follow up questions of Professor Forel. So if I look at the International Energy Agency statistics on coal for last year, the global fleet of coal is 1,610 gigawatts of generation. Of that, 77 are subcritical systems cycles, 20% are supercritical steam cycles, 3% use the highest efficiency or ultra supercritical steam cycles. IGCC don't even reach the 1%. In general, there are 6 IGCC's coal power plants for power installed together. There are 17 IGCCs with a combination of some kind of biomass that use some power. There are 137 gasification plants, mostly for chemicals. So when you look at the technology, it hasn't taken off. Since 1920, we have said it has better control of pollutants, it has lower water demand, it can produce hydrogen, and has lower costs when you consider the capture unit. And for 20 years, we have said it has promise, and for 20 years, it hasn't taken off. So my questions to you are, what are the 3 main bottlenecks that have hindered the development of IGCC plants? And how does your thesis contribute to solve those?
Co-clear opponent, thank you for your question and also for the appreciative words. I think IGCC power plants, yeah, there has been plants which were existing and also have been closed down and things like that. But one of the main reasons in one of the most cost-intensive, let's say, part of an IGCC power plant is the gasifier itself, and this is something which is also thermodynamically very, let's say, there are losses, thermodynamic losses when in the gasifier. So the first constraint would be the use of gasification, but my thesis also shows that in existing IGCC power plants, if you use a lot of biomass, then you're also producing a lot of renewable power, and also the CO2 which you are sort of generating or capturing is also basically you're promoting carbon neutrality. So in some way, I think. So we have to be clear what we want. I mean, if we want more renewable power production, then I mean IGCC power plants are good candidates.
Okay, so the gasifier is one, and
Yeah.
3 bottlenecks.
Yeah, and I think if I would say it's I think the main, for me, the main bottleneck is the cost, which is involved with gasification. But then, yeah, it could be also with subsidies or things like that, which are available to maybe construct the plant.
Would your thesis help to reduce those costs?
My thesis gives presents some design concepts. So if I think which shows that if there is an existing plant and you make some changes, what are, let's say, thermodynamically the implications? Now this can be, I think, directly used to see whether in terms of cost how much can you, whether you save or whether you actually
But the reality of today is that coal power generation is under pressure.
Yes.
Industries that have coal assets are in problems. They have very, very low marginal. And you're asking them to make a large investment to give 30% of the coal to produce more costly because you may get a higher efficiency. But you know, will they have the money? Is this a little bit in the space of investment?
No, because I think the work also shows that, I mean, if it's not only about that, if you have a coal plant and you want to basically, it's not about the percentage, I think, which is the message from the thesis, but it is also basically that to show that actually existing equipment in power plants can be used to co-gasify large percentage of biomass. And this anyway reduces, I think, a lot of costs.
Well, it depends what your modifications are.
Yes,
revamping and all.
So there is a balance which I think you have to find out, and that is in terms of economics. I think it is difficult for me to say with just thermodynamic calculations whether this is possible.
We will move on. I would like to ask a question regarding the compression of CO2. As you know, and you also point out in your thesis, it is responsible for a lot of the energy penalty, for the RCG loss, the compression is there. My first question is, how did you select the pressure at which the CO2 should be ready for transport? In one chapter you have 150 bars, in the other chapter you have 110 bars. Why the difference? How did you select those pressures?
Thank you for your question. So, as you see in chapter 3 and 4, there are also the modeling approaches were also a bit different, and also so that in chapter 4, I have used basically the EPTF document, which is a European benchmark task force document, and I used those values to benchmark my basically the CO2 capture system. Yeah, the values which are used in chapter 2 are a bit lower, but then it is not significantly different.
Well, it's 150 bars.
Yes, and in chapter 4 it is about 110 bar.
Yeah, 50 bars.
Yes. Yeah. So there was the idea was also to see that. Okay, it was not basically to come up with an optimal design for the CO2 capture system. The idea was to see that if in a hypothetical situation we consider some parameters of a CO2 capture system, what effect does it have on retrofitting in an existing plant?
Okay, let's assume the company is going to have 150 bars pressure discharge. In your chapter 3, you use a two-stage compressor to get to that. So actually what you do, when I look at one of the tables, I think table 3.5, you go first to 35 bars, and then you go from 35 to 152 in one stage. I was quite surprised, because what I generally see are 4, 5, 6, I haven't even seen 7-stage compression plants. You are going to 2. So my question to you is, what kind of compressor actually you are using? Is this some kind of, supersonic compressor with a high compression ratio? Because I personally doubt that you can make it with 2 compressors, and I'm very worried about the amount of water. Will the water be enough in your CO2 discharge pressure if you only have 2 compressors?
I think that in terms of real practical issues, there might be, I think, a big problem to compress it from 35 to 150 bar. But I think with series of intercooling steps in between, I think if you use basically 6-7 stages of compressing, it might be possible. But I think as one of a validated model, this can be used to see actually whether practically it would be possible to achieve.
Why we know that that is very difficult. There are issues with the temperature as well. There is high increase in temperature when you go these changes. Is highly cost, and you may not reach the amount of water decrease. And I didn't see any molecular sieves to take out water from your CO2 stream. So why to choose a 2-stage compressor?
I think it was also because, as I pointed out to you, that I wanted to see whether, so what is the effect of really, let's say we have CO2 at some pressure, and basically we compress it to some pressure, and so idea was to see how this on a macro level affects the net efficiency of the power plant.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Would you be able to see it? Because at this point you have a system where the torrefaction is not included, and you have a system where actually your compression design is actually included. Very hypothetical.
Hypothetical, but I think for the CO2 capture system, it might not be. Yeah, I think in terms of practical available compressors which are there, it might be not it might not be possible. But I think in terms of the net efficiency which we get from such power plants with a series of steps, it could be. I'm not sure whether it will be very significantly different.
I would think so.
But I think this we have to do. I think such models actually can be used to see whether actually practically we can reach the desired pressure.
Would not be better the other way around? To look at what is current compression or the basic stage of compression and then try to model that.
Yes, but I think in terms of the modeling itself, there were issues already which were being worked upon, and I think in future it is of course very important that it has to be further optimized to see realistic efficiencies.
There's time for a small question.
Okay. In chapter 4, just to get away from that, your analysis is based, and if you look at figure 4.1, you use a typical load curve. That is a typical load curve of today's system. Now you have a new concept design, and you have used that load curve to actually, you use it as a basis to generate a simplified load curve for the flexibility of your new design or configuration. That is not how the load curves look today. If you look at the load curve in Germany or in places with a high penetration of renewables. Now, the whole issue of having flexibility is because you want these kind of power plants to answer to that high penetration of renewables. So the load curve in 10 years may look drastically different. A lot of peaks, a lot of downs. Right now you have this kind of two system. What are the influence, or what can be the influence of changing the load factor, or the load curve, into a more realistic one in your system?
Thank you for your question. Actually, to design the new system, you have to start from let's say a load curve somewhere. So there was data available from TUDelft which showed me that there is a large fluctuation in the daily power demand, and that was sort of a starting point which I could use to design the new system. In the future, of course, as I mentioned also in the introduction of chapter 4, in the future when there is increased renewable power production, a large variation is expected in
and what would be the impact in the resource?
The impact would be that, because also there are factors where, so now in my model I assume that the switch between charging and discharging is immediate, which is already a very simplified assumption. But as more and more there is variation, we indeed need more faster switching applications. And it is about, so the idea was that we, with this study we come up with some parameters which helps design materials which could be operated in a more efficient and more faster manner.
Professor Ramirez, are you satisfied?
Yeah.
And may I invite Dr. Arafin, co-promoter, to continue the operation?
Many director, thank you very much. Other promoters. We have had questions about this integration till now. But I think one of the areas we have studied is internal forming for other fuels. It's not yet touched upon. So I actually have a question. So if you are now starting up the studies looking at reforming kinetics in solid oxide processes, etc., you are quite optimistic about solid oxide fuel cells coming up in the future, which can have internal forming. Now, are you optimistic? And if so, such solid oxide fuel cells, if they come at all, and if they are capable of internal reforming methane or natural gas, will they look different from present day sources? And if so, how?
Silk Clear promoter. Thank you for your question. As I pointed out in the thesis, transitioning from power plants to more kinetic study, there is a need to really optimize existing or available solid oxide fuel cells which are capable of internally reforming hydrocarbons, and there are operating challenges. There are severe operating challenges which have to be addressed. Challenges like basically to have a safe operation in terms of carbon deposition, and also basically to ensure that there is not much degradation of the cell. So, currently there are systems which are available commercially which are capable of handling hydrocarbon fuels. And so in future, in terms of how the system looks, I don't think there is much of a difference expected, but there is of course some optimization required within the SOFC itself to more safely operate it with hydrocarbon fuels.
But what kind of optimization?
Optimization in terms of I think to understand kinetics more better, because also there is, when in an operating cell we have current, we have reforming. So the effects, as I try to study in this work, it is very difficult, and there is no still any consensus which has been achieved. So in my opinion, I think also we need to carry out a bit more fundamental level studies in terms of elementary reaction kinetics to see how these reactions are affecting also the electrochemical oxidation itself.
So your position is that, so how to optimize is not yet clear, but even to reach that point you need fundamental studies. That's what you have.
So Syria-based cells, there are lesser fundamental studies which have been carried out till now, and one of my also recommendations is that in future we have to carry out more elementary studies on more elementary chemistry on Syria cells.
Okay, thank you very much.
Dr. Arvind, are you satisfied?
Yes, I am.
Yes. May I invite Professor Geering to continue the position?
Thank you, Meneer Director. I have a question on proposition number 6.
Well, from Wendt, could you have proposition number 6, please?
Interhuman expectations are largely unnecessary.
But from offenders, I have to confess that I did not understand this proposition. Let's say, just didn't understand it. So I would like you to invite you to explain it a little bit. And in fact, for me, I expect a lot from people. And to be specific, I was expecting, and I am expecting a lot from you. So could you please explain it?
Promoter, thank you for your question. The main, so interhuman, what I mean here is that between two humans, expectations are largely unnecessary. So the output
between two humans, isn't it?
Yes, it is possible. But my main theme, main logic here is that the output an output from another person can be different, and we should not already preempt the output from the other person. It only, I think, it imbibes more, doesn't imbibe rational thinking in a human.
I think only now I understand where you come from, but let's say if you expect something from someone, it doesn't preempt the output, at least not in my...
No, but I think you are already sort of, you want that person does this or behaves in that particular way. But how is it helping that person? Because he's under pressure and he's having fears, and he's not just able to independently think or have a rational thinking. So that's why I have said that it is not completely unnecessary, but I think in terms of in many situations it is just not required. Because I can also say that in the Asian part of the world, which represents almost like more than 50% of the population, there are many other let's say areas where people expect many things from you, but it is just not it's just not necessary.
Thank you very much. I will keep speaking a lot.
Thank you very much, Professor Gerens. And I would like to ask Professor Boosman to continue the opposition.
Dank u wel, meneer Waarde Vens. I would like to start with a small question about my thesis on page 22, equation TUDelft. And you write down E multiplied by the volume to the power n is constant. Can you explain what this why you use this equation?
Thank you for your question. So the basic aim of this was to basically to do an off-design study, and the idea was to predict in an off-design situation to predict basically the mass flow rate at the inlet of the turbine in the new off-design study. Now, I think. It's for a polytropic process. We use this this Poisson equation to relate the pressure and the volume.
Yeah, so this is for an isotopic process.
Yeah, it's a polytropic process.
That was the puzzle. You use program, cycle tempo, and this is not also an equation for an isotopic process, but also an equation for constant Cp and constant Cv. Yeah. So why don't you use variable properties?
I think in terms of the Cp and the Cv itself, changing in an off-design in the off-design situation, I think a very significant change is not expected. So I think to assume fairly constant Cp or Cv for such a macro thermodynamic study is sufficient.
You agree with me that if you use a computer program, it is not very difficult to include.
Yes.
Okay, and then my second question is a little bit more general, about energy storage. On page 11 of your thesis, you list a couple of ways to store energy. And you have mechanical storage, chemical storage, thermal storage, electrochemical storage, and electric storage. And could you give us some idea about the size of these storage mechanisms, how much energy you can store, and which is the best one?
Thank you for your question. But I think to come up with something what is best, it depends on type of on what type of and what scale of storage you want to focus. But
you live in the ICT world, so of course, power plants. What would be your suggestion to do?
So as I pointed out, there are many options for storage, and like for example, if we consider mechanical storage like compressed or pumped hydro, there is it is also many times sort of location based, and it really depends, so in terms of flexibility of using the storage technology itself, there are some constraints. But what I have tried to show is that because we already are producing hydrogen in the system, it is probably wise to store it in a chemical way in metal hydrides, and it also additionally gives you more flexibility in terms of heat integration. But of course, you could also just store fuels like methane directly in underground or in salt caverns or whatever. So store hydrogen or things like that. But then the intrinsic advantage, what I try to point out, is that with metal hydrides there is an advantage of additional advantage of heat integration and to improve the flexibility in the power plant.
So recently there is also a lot of interest in ammonia, storage in the form of ammonia. So what do you think about that? Maybe from hydrogen ammonia.
Ammonia is, yes, it is one of the also very efficient ways of storing hydrogen. But I think you also have to produce ammonia from the power plant, and so my because I also wanted to basically look into how well we can heat integrate the system. So in my opinion, metal hydrides give a more advantage in terms of the heat integration in the system.
Okay. Then my last question. So you basically have been working in this field for say 6 years now, and so there have been a lot of changes. And when we started this project, I think this was a very promising technology. Now the electricity price went down quite a bit. So what would be your opinion for future investments? So that our department wants to invest some money in the research lines. So what should we do? Who an expert now in this field? So.
I think because on one side there are companies which are investing a lot in developing large power plants, and on the other side we are doing really system studies on power plants. I think it makes more sense that we really try to somehow collaborate with industry to actually transfer knowledge.
Thank you, Madam Leader. I request from vendors and parents to return to their seats in the audience. The committee will withdraw for further deliberation in the committee room. This session is adjourned.
You don't have to stand in attention. Okay, wait for the call. दरवाजा बंद होने दे जाने दे तमाम बहुत
postdoc or for doctorate at Delft University of Technology. I congratulate you and your family on earning your doctorate talent that time. You may return to your seat. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your presence. I hereby close this academic ceremony.
We clap for ourselves. Good job.
Huh?